Chapter 5 Nihon-Ja. Horace frowned, puzzled. George evidently felt the same. He leaned forward to question the messenger. "But why would the people turn on their emperor?" he asked. "They love Lord Shigeru." It wasn't idle flattery or the sort of sycophancy that you might expect to hear around a ruler. Both Horace and George had seen ample evidence of Shigeru's popularity as they had travelled north with him from the palace. But Shigeru was shaking his head at them, a look of immense sadness on his normally cheerful features. "Not the people," he said bitterly. "The senshi. Lord Arasaka has led his clan in a revolt against my rule. They've seized the palace at Ito and killed many of my supporters. The Umaki clan has joined them." These were two of the most powerful and influential senshi clans in the country. Horace and George exchanged horrified glances. Then George addressed the emperor. "But, Your Excellency, these clans have sworn their obedience to you, surely. How can they break that oath?" George knew that among the senshi class, an oath was inviolable. Shigeru's lips were drawn together in a tight line, and he shook his head, unable to speak for the moment, overcome with emotion. It was Shukin who answered for him. "They claim the emperor has violated his own oath by trying to raise up the common people against their betters. They claim he has betrayed his class, the senshi class, and is no longer worthy to be emperor. And as a result," Shigeru added bitterly, "their oath of loyalty to me is worthless. I am the oathbreaker, not they." "But," Horace hesitated, searching for the right words, "you're not raising up the common people. You're simply trying to make their lives better by recognizing their value. How can Arasaka get away with such a distortion of the true facts?" Shigeru met the young man's gaze. He had regained a little control now and spoke evenly. "Osan, people will believe half-truths and distortions if they coincide with what they want to believe, if they reflect their fears. The senshi have an irrational fear that I want to take away their power over the people, and Arasaka has traded upon that fear." "But Arasaka doesn't believe it himself," George said. "Arasaka believes something else," Shigeru replied. "When the previous emperor died without an heir, Arasaka believes he should have been chosen as emperor in my place." "He's been busy for months," Shukin told them, his contempt for the traitor Arasaka all too obvious in his voice, "sowing fear and dissent among the senshi, spreading the lie that my cousin is betraying his class and planning to give the common people power over them. His campaign has been successful, it seems. Like all successful lies, it is based on the tiniest grain of truth," Shigeru said. "I do want the people to have a greater stake in the way the country is governed. Arasaka has blown that out of all proportion." Horace turned to the messenger. He recognized him now as one of the senior advisors he had seen at the Ito Palace. "You said 2 clans had joined this revolt," he said. "What about the others? What about the Emperor's clan?" "Many of the Emperor's clan are dead already. They tried to resist Arasaka, and his men killed them. They outnumbered them 5 or 6 to 1. Those who aren't dead are scattered and in hiding." "And the others?" George asked. "The Meishi, the Tokradi, and the Kitotashi. They owe no allegiance to Arasaka." "None of them can stand against the Shimonseki on their own, and each is waiting to see what the others will do. So far, all they will say is that if what Lord Arasaka says is true, then perhaps his actions are justified." George snorted in disgust. "If and perhaps," he said, "the language of procrastination and uncertainty. That's just people looking to justify their own lack of action." "Arasaka has the momentum," Horace said. As a soldier, he understood the value of swift and determined action that presented possible dissidence with a fait accompli. If they'd resisted at the very beginning, Arasaka might not have got away with it. Now he has control of the palace, and the ball is rolling. It's too late to stop him easily. He looked at Shigeru. The question is, Your Excellency, what are you planning to do about it? Shigeru paused thoughtfully and glanced at the messenger. Where is Arasaka now? He's heading north from the capital, Your Excellency. He plans to take you prisoner. Shukin and the Emperor exchanged a quick glance. How far behind you is he, Reito-san? Shukin asked, and the messenger shrugged. Probably several days. He didn't set out immediately. But there are some survivors from the royal army not far behind me. They could be here in a few hours. How many of them? Horace asked quickly. Without any conscious decision on his part, he was beginning to think about the possibility of a quick counterattack, but Reito's next words dispelled the idea. Only 40 or 50, he replied, and Arasaka has at least 300 men with him. Horace nodded, chewing his lip thoughtfully. Shigeru's army had been a small one. He ruled by consensus, not force, which was why, he thought, Arasaka's coup had been so successful. All the more reason for us to pause here for a few hours, Shigeru said, taking charge of the situation. Arasaka won't be here for several days, but my soldiers will arrive soon. We should join up with them, and while we're waiting, we can decide on our next move. They moved off the track onto a small, level meadow beside it. The men from the escort pitched 2 pavilions, one for the command group and one for the rest of the party. They wouldn't be camping overnight, so all that was needed was temporary shelter from the weather while they waited for the survivors of Shigeru's army to arrive. And while the leaders had time to consider the situation and make their plans. A woven bamboo mat was placed over the damp ground inside the pavilion, and a low table and 5 stools placed on it. Shigeru, Shukin, Reito, Horace, and George sat around the table. An orderly placed several pots of green tea and handleless porcelain cups before them. Horace sipped gratefully at the tea. It wasn't as good as coffee, he thought, but any hot drink in this weather was welcome. The canvas walls of the pavilion shook in a gust of wind, and the first rain rattled against them. North, Shukin was saying. We have to head back north. Logical, since Arasaka and his army are in the south, Horace said. But is there any other advantage in the north? Do you have allies there? Clans you could raise so that you could face Arasaka? Shigeru shook his head. There are no Senshi clans in the north, he said. There are the Kikori, that's all. They are not warriors. His 2 countrymen nodded agreement, but Horace wanted more information. Who are the Kikori? Timber workers, George told him. They work among the tall timber in the mountains. Their villages are scattered everywhere. If they're timber workers, they'll be fit and strong and they'll have axes, Horace said, and they'll know how to use them. Could we recruit them as soldiers? Would they fight for you, Your Excellency? Shigeru and Shukin exchanged glances, and the Emperor shook his head. They would. They are intensely loyal, but I won't ask them to. They're not trained warriors or son. Arasaka's men would massacre them. I can't ask them to fight when they have no hope. George leaned forward and touched Horace's sleeve, drawing his attention. He added, in a lowered tone, There's another problem, Horace. The Kikori would fight, but they wouldn't believe they had any chance against the Senshi, because they'd believe they have no right to fight them. No right? What do you mean? Of course they... It's a matter of their mindset. They've spent centuries believing they are inferior to the Senshi. Shigeru-san is trying to turn that around, but it will take a long time to do it. Just as the senshi are conditioned to believe they are superior to the other classes, the Kikori believe the senshi are their superiors. They might go into battle against them, but they do it expecting to lose. "That's crazy," Horace said, but he could see the reason in George's statement. "You're a soldier, Horace. Would you lead an army into battle if the men expected to be beaten? Even worse, if the men thought they had no right to win." "I suppose not." Horace's shoulders slumped. For a moment, he thought he had seen a possible course of action, but George was right. An army that believed it was destined to lose would be marching to its death. "There are the Hisanu," Shuken was saying thoughtfully, "and Lord Nematsu is an honorable man. He wouldn't turn his back on his oath of allegiance." "The Hisanu are certainly fighters," Shigeru said, "but to the far north, with an enormous mountain range separating us from them. It would take weeks, months even, to reach them, and I have no idea how they would respond. They are strange people." "If they are people, in fact," Reito put in. Shigeru gave him a look of rebuke. "Don't believe the old superstitions, Reitu," he said. "The Hisanu are unusual, shall we say, but I am convinced they are human." "Who are the Hisanu?" Horace whispered to George. "Are they another clan of warriors?" But George was shaking his head, a puzzled look on his face. "I've never heard of them. They're not a clan. I'm sure I know all of them." Before they could pursue the matter any further, Shuken spoke in an authoritative tone. "Whether or not we can muster the forces for a counterattack against Arasaka, the first course is to make sure the Emperor is safe. We have to head north, back into the mountains. We won't ask the Kikori to fight, but they'll be willing to hide us from Arasaka." Shigeru was nodding agreement. "Perhaps not the most gallant course of action," he said, "but certainly the wisest. If we can evade Arasaka's men for a month or two, winter will be here, and the weather will protect us." "There's always the fortress at Rankoshi," Reito suggested, and the Emperor and his cousin looked at him quickly. "Rankoshi?" said Shuken. "I always thought that was a myth." Reito shook his head. "Many people do, but I'm sure it's real. The problem is how to find it." "What's this fortress?" Horace asked. "Rankoshi is a fortress that's spoken of in an old folk tale," Shigeru told them. "That's why Shuken doubted its existence. It's said to be high in the mountains, in a hidden valley. Many hundreds of years ago, there was a civil war over the rightful succession to the throne. Not unlike now, in fact," Shuken said grimly, and the Emperor glanced at him. "Precisely," he said, then turned back to the two Araluens. "The eventual winner used Rankoshi as his power base. It was said to be an impregnable fortress, with massive walls and a deep moat." "Sounds like the sort of place you could use," Horace said. Shigeru nodded thoughtfully. "It would be derelict by now," he said, "if it exists at all." "If it's there, there is one group of people who will know where it is," Reito said. "The Kikori. They've spent generations combing the mountains for groves of trees, then building trails to bring the fallen logs down to the low country. They know every inch of the northern mountains." "Then why have they never revealed its location?" Shuken said. Shigeru inclined his head towards his cousin. "Why should they?" he replied. "Over the years, the Kikori have had little reason to love the ruling class of this country. If they knew this secret, I doubt they would have told the senshi about it. They won't fight the warrior class, but there's no reason why they should do anything to help them." "Good point," Horace said. "So, all we have to do is head north, contact the Kikori, and take shelter in this mythical fortress?" Shigeru gave him a good-humoured nod. After his shock at the news of Arasaka's treachery, he had recovered some of his normal spirits. "Perhaps we should take it one step at a time, Osan," he said. "Our first priority is simply to evade Arasaka, and for that I agree that we have to head north. But I'm afraid you won't be coming with us." Horace opened his mouth to reply, felt George's hand on his arm, and stopped. "We're on a diplomatic mission, Horace," George said quietly. "We have no right to interfere in internal matters among the Nihon-Ja." That statement brought Horace up short. His first instinct on hearing about Arasaka's rebellion had been to help the Emperor find a way to defeat the treacherous warlord. Now he realized he had no right to do any such thing. He sat back, confused. Shigeru saw the conflict on his face and offered Horace a sad little smile. "George-san is right. This is not your battle. You are observers in our country, and, just as I can't ask the Kikori to fight, I can't expect you to risk your lives on my behalf. You should return to your land." "It might be better if Osan and George-san also avoided Arasaka's men," Shukin said. "The Shimonseki may not understand the niceties of diplomatic immunity." Shigeru looked at his cousin. Shukin made a good point, he thought. Arasaka's men would have their blood up. They would be arrogant and argumentative, and Horace might well be provoked by them if he encountered them. They would know the young Araluen was a friend of the Emperor, and they would know he was a warrior. Better if he avoided contact altogether. "There is a secondary road to Iwanai a little north of here," he said. "It's not as well travelled as the main road. In fact, it's more of a mountain track. But you'd be better to take it, I think. Perhaps you should accompany us that far, then leave us." Horace shook his head helplessly. He knew they were right, but he hated to desert a friend in danger. "I don't like it, Your Excellency," he said eventually. "Neither do I, or son. But trust me, it is for the best."